So, what's your doctorate background?
In psychology. I have a PhD from Loyola University in Chicago, Illinois, and I've been in clinical practice for the past 34 years. Um, but I've been focusing primarily on grief and bereavement, I'd say over the past 10 years or so. And I had some personal experiences with deathbed visions, which led to me writing my book, We Do Not Die Alone. And so that kind of put me off on that path. But I was always interested in the paranormal, uh, near death experiences, deathbed visions, and now more recently, terminal lucidity, after death communications, all of those things. And past life regressions also. I've
Mm.
done those training in
So you
those.
work in clinical psychotherapy, do you?
Yes. Well,
That's
I'm trying to
interesting because
retire now.
that's what I'm just getting started in
Oh,
that as
really?
a
Oh,
in CBT.
oh, okay.
So that's quite interesting. My plan is to have a private practice in that, dealing with kind of looking at this spirituality as a kind of a base philosophy of therapy and
Uh huh.
growing it on that.
Yes.
So yeah,
Well, good for you. I
it's
hope. Wish you a lot of luck.
thanks. So do I.
It's
So
a challenge. Do you think that your research you've done on these death-related experiences has changed how you feel about death?
I do. I mean, as I say, I was always very. I always followed kind of the mainstream scientific view that once you die, that's it. Brain creates consciousness. No brain, no consciousness, and I couldn't
Hmm.
see any reason why that wouldn't be the case. Until you start looking at these. And the first time I heard about, I think the first thing I heard about was the near death experience because it was
Uh,
quite common. And you think, of course, straight away, well, their brain's not working, they're having hallucinations. And of course, you think like that. But the difference with me, because I was that fear of death was there, I always found those sort of experiences interesting. So when you start looking into them deeply, you start to see that it's not, doesn't seem to be possible with hallucination or drug induced visions in all cases, in some certainly, but in all of them, it would seem a difficult thing to do. So that kind of thing got me into it more. And then you look at more phenomena,
hmm.
and you start to have this big pool of evidence that seems to suggest that there is certainly something more to it than we can currently see.
Yes.
What
Yes.
that is, we don't know, but there
Yes.
is seems to be something more.
Well, it's only been, I guess, since the 70s where Raymond Moody published his book, Life Before Life, and and people had a very hard time accepting that. Excuse me. And even today, there are people who don't believe that those are real experiences. But there's so many books out there by people who've had the experience, and uh, that it leaves little doubt that something definitely is going on at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
And I think a lot of people seem to. It's not, doesn't seem so much that they refuse that the experience happens. It's what the implications of that is that people disagree on,
Hmm.
as to
Yes.
whether it's physically
Yeah.
created or something more.
Yes.
Say I lean on the something more, but
Mhm. And it may be where I live in the deep South in Louisiana, but a lot of people are still afraid to talk about those experiences that they had because people will think that they're crazy.
mm,
And so that's a shame because
it
they
is.
can't share something that's so meaningful to them.
That's it, and it's an experience that maybe can take an hour, but has a superb effect on the rest of their lives.
Oh, absolutely.
And it seems to be a memory that one of the few types of memory that is never kind of embellished
Hmm.
subconsciously
Hmm.
and is always the same
Yeah,
over
that's true.
years and years. Um, so you've done a lot of research into near-death experience phenomena as well.
Yeah, near death experience, like I said, deathbed visions. I
Mm-hmm.
was particularly interested in that. After death communication, and I guess more recently, the terminal lucidity or paradoxical lucidity, as it's referred to today.
Mm-hmm. We'll start with that because I think that's one of the stronger lines of evidence for a survival hypothesis,
Uh,
because eternal lucidity. Because in those cases, in especially in Alzheimer's, where the brain is literally decaying,
hmm.
or at least it's in a state where there should not be lucidity, and
Hmm.
then all of a sudden it can be kind of within a week or a day or an hour of death, of the moment of death, suddenly it seems to be working hyper normally, if
Yes.
not standard consciousness. And that seems in a brain that should be completely on the edge of death, to
Mm-hmm.
suddenly have a moment like that just before seems to be very counterintuitive to the materialistic kind of idea.
Absolutely.
I spoke with, Dr. Gerald Burley.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke with him about this, and he suggested that there is certainly some materialistic explanation to do with the hormones and the various chemicals going on in the brain at the time of death. As an anesthesiologist, I don't know what his understanding is of these kind of brain conditions, but what's your opinion on that kind of idea?
Well, I think that, everything is mediated by our brains. Um, but this is such an amazing thing because the brains of people who have Alzheimer's, who have brain tumors, who have other degenerative diseases of the brain, can all have this experience. And so it kind of suggests that there's not just one pathway that's creating it. I don't know enough about neurophysiology to say what I think that might be, but it's very intriguing how someone whose brain they haven't spoken in years and don't recognize anybody, and then all of a sudden they'll perk up and they'll ask for a latte. They'll talk about all kinds of stuff, ask how family members are, this, that, and the other. And then, the problem is that families get excited that there's been a miracle, and then
They're
they die.
recovering. Yeah.
Yeah, that they're recovering, and then they die. But it's absolutely fascinating to me. And there's some recent research, I guess, in the past couple of years with the National Institute for Aging that did on the study, looked at Alzheimer's and paradoxical lucidity, trying to find some answer to the Alzheimer's question. Is it possible that there is some mechanism that can be used to help um, return some clarity to these people's thoughts and voice? It would be wonderful if they could.
It would. With terminal lucidity, there's the main kind of idea amongst those who are more spiritually orientated or more akin to the paranormal explanation is that it seems to be that consciousness is in the process of leaving the damaged brain and can become more clear as a result and more pure, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that kind of explanation?
Well, until I have more information about the brain and how that's working, I believe it's a spiritual experience. You can link that with all these other experiences that we talked about. It's amazing. It is like a miracle, even if it's just for 5 minutes. That somebody's brain who is so messed up, can do those things. It's just amazing. And with terminal lucidity is connected with deathbed visions because many times it's at the end when someone has been uncommunicative and unresponsive that they'll sit up and say, "Oh, look, there's my husband. He's come to get me," and then die immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
those things are all kind of intertwined. And a lot of the experiences are very similar in terms of near-death experience, deathbed visions, all of these things. So how do you explain that? You know, it's whether it's a spiritual thing or a materialistic thing, the fact that people can have these experiences and it so dramatically changes their lives and the lives of those around them is just amazing.
It is. I think the only problem that I can find with that and with folks that say that these experiences are, it doesn't matter if we can explain them materialistically,
Mm-hmm.
the experience is still valid and still very life changing. And to me, yeah, that's fine. But if we can take them all the way down and show that it is just this illusion created by material brain, then to me that seems to incredibly devalue the experience because it's just a comforting hallucination. It has no real meaning, and although it gives us comfort, it ultimately doesn't mean anything, and that seems a shame.
Yeah, and these things are not like real hallucinations. Hallucinations tend to be more frightening, and all of these experiences are very comforting and soothing for people. So there's a big difference in that. Most people, I guess, if they see somebody coming to them who's been dead for a long time, might be frightened of that, but not
Certainly,
these people.
if my granddad came back and stood at the side of my bed, I'd be terrified. As I believe everybody would be.
Yeah, particularly if you're
Yeah,
not dying, if you're not in that
exactly.
state.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, deathbed visions, there's something I'm always extra careful about, because the problem with this sort of phenomena at the end of life is you've always got to take into account what kind of drugs are being used for sedation, or what the state of the brain is. But the ones that interest me are those that include veridical
Hmm.
aspects.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, people have, the ones that interest me are the people that see deceased people who they weren't aware was deceased at the
Hmm.
time, and they'd only died maybe an hour or a day
Yes.
before. Do you know of any accounts such as that?
Oh, yes, very much so. Where veridical, for people who don't know, is that it can be replicated or somebody has seen it, and so
Yeah.
you have another voice adding to
Hmm.
that. But yes, there are early on, and I can't remember who the researcher was. One of the things they looked at in particular were those experiences that were veridical, so that they could say, here, this happened and this person was aware of it and can attest to it. And so that gives it a little bit more power. But, the people who have these deathbed visions are, they can be seeing deceased relatives, and all of the figures that people see in a deathbed vision are deceased. They don't see live people. They see someone who's deceased. And the other thing is that when you have a deathbed vision, you're not in a state of confusion. People are very clear. They know that they're here, and they know that they're somewhere else, and that there's somebody here who's coming to get them. So that's very different than being delusional. Um, there was an account I remember about this woman who the nurse was in her room, and she was, picking at the air and stuff. And the nurse asked what she was doing, and she said, "Well, I'm looking at all the butterflies around me." And the nurse said, "Well, I don't see them." And then she said, "Well, of course you don't, dear. You're not dying. When you die, you'll see them." Now, that's not somebody who's out of their head. That's
No.
somebody who knows
No.
what's going on. So
Mm.
that's the thing about deathbed visions, is that they are very different than
Mm.
hallucinations.
Mm. So how would we compare, say, a deathbed vision in terms of its properties to, say, a morphine-induced hallucination?
Well, I think that, again, it's the clarity of the experience. If it's morphine induced, you might not be too clear about what's going on. Um, I think that has something to do with it. And see, a lot of times when at the end of life, when people are so drugged that they don't have these experiences because they're zonked out, that they aren't able to because they're sedated.
Mm. Mm. So yes, it certainly comes back to the hyper realistic kind of lucidity of the experience, and it does certainly seem incredible that if one was to claim that these are drug induced or dying brain induced hallucinations, that they are incredibly consistent ones.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, it's always seems to be
Same.
deceased relatives. You'd have thought a random hallucination caused by whatever physical means would be, the typical Dumbo pink elephants, or even you could argue for butterflies, but living and deceased people with three heads, you'd thought it'd be completely sporadic,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly, as you say, not extremely lucid. And
Yes.
certainly, I wouldn't have thought to the extent where you can communicate around you with
Yes.
calm and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and agitation.
Yeah. So there's a big difference in that. The recent study that came out, I think I have it here somewhere because Dr. Bathany, who is in Austria, he was one of the um, ones who did some of the initial work with NAM and AHM about paradoxical lucidity. And they did some research about, it's hard to do research on paradoxical lucidity because, somebody who can't give consent on their own, who's in a comatose
Yeah.
state, or,
Yeah.
who wants to be hooked up at the end of life to an EEG, or, so there are problems with that. So a lot of it is um, information from nurses or family members.
Yeah.
But
Retrospective.
yeah, retrospective. So they did find some difference in terms of people who had Alzheimer's, that there was, I've forgotten the statistics on it now, and I don't remember where I put my paper. Anyway, about that, there were changes that were noted in the brains of these patients at the end of life. So they're hopeful they can continue on and find some other things that would be helpful to have
So the
other
question,
people.
yeah. So the question is there then: does the brain suddenly retain its ability to work lucidly, or does that seem to indicate some kind of a separation or an interaction between the spirit or
Yeah.
the consciousness?
Well,
And it certainly needs further study, definitely.
absolutely. And then if somebody's brain is, as they've described it, just completely destroyed, how could it do that?
Yeah, unless you have sudden regeneration of the brain
And
tissue,
that
it
doesn't
seems.
happen.
No, you wouldn't have thought so.
That
No,
doesn't happen.
one of the explanations I've heard, which seems reasonable in some cases, especially in the case of tumours, is that maybe when the brain dies, the mass of the tumour or whatever growth it be slowly disintegrates and allows more semi-normal function to continue as that growth decays, which may explain towards the end of the illness. But for Alzheimer's and degenerative conditions like that, which are purely breaking down of the neurons,
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to allow for some sort of regeneration phenomena, which by itself would be a miracle.
Yes,
I'd have
that's
thought.
true. It would be
Yeah.
a huge miracle if
Mm.
that were to happen. Yeah. So it's there were stories. I mean, I think it goes back 250 years that people began to talk about uh, terminal lucidity, although it wasn't named until a few years ago, or paradoxical lucidity. And one of the examples they use is this woman who was born with severe birth defects. You may be aware of it, cognitive and physical, and lived her entire life in an asylum, never talking, had no social skills in terms of toileting and all those things. But as she was dying, all of a sudden, the nurses heard somebody singing. And so this woman had started singing songs of the dying, like in a funeral where you would have certain songs. She'd never spoken a word in her life. Now, how do you
Mm.
explain that? I mean,
Mm.
it's things that
Yeah.
are just these little miracles, and
Mm.
be
It's yeah. It's little tales like that that suggest that there must be something other than just the brain, because if her brain was unable to
yeah, okay,
even muster speech, we don't know if she was able to learn speech and just not dictate, but certainly that would entail that her brain repaired itself to a certain level where she was able to then speak. But to me that seems unlikely,
yeah,
especially if it's her whole life.
yes, that does seem
But
unlikely.
unfortunately things like that people can quite reasonably pass off as anecdotes and
Oh
not
yeah,
of any evidential value, because it's just the way it is, unfortunately. But certainly they're worth taking into consideration.
absolutely. I mean, there are examples of the phenomenon. It's about, it needs to be researched more in whatever way, instead of just passed off as silliness.
I think the issue, as you say, is probably twofold. One, the morality aspect of it, and two, getting funding for this, because
Yes,
there's no monetary value to it, really,
yeah,
as opposed to pharmaceuticals and different areas of
oh yeah.
science that can generate.
But if the
Um,
National Institute of Aging is willing to look at it, then that's good. They can fund some
it's
research
a
to be
start,
done.
yeah.
Yep.
Certainly needs to be a shift in the kind of dogma or the paradigm that
Yeah.
there is, because it's not explaining everything.
Well, and
Um,
people don't like to talk about death or deal with death in the first place. And then
mm,
if you add to it these phenomena, it's like, well, no, I don't want to go there at all.
mm,
That freaks me out too much.
Mm-hmm. And it's a shame because death is the only certain thing we're all to
That's right.
experience. And
That's
in
right.
my opinion, I want to know where I'm going. I want to know exactly what I can expect,
Hmm.
which is a shame at 24. But there we are.
Yeah. Well, and most people want to know that where are they going and what to expect. And
It's just a shame that general society has tabooed it to such an extent. I mean,
absolutely.
in the 18th, 19th century, even it was a part of everyday life. Your
Yes.
next door neighbour
Yeah.
would die at 30, your mother would die when she was 25,
Yeah.
and you'd live with it, and it was
Yeah.
just the way it was. But
And
now it's
back in,
become,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just say now it's become such a taboo that people aren't even allowed to die naturally and properly anymore.
That's right.
And it's not a part of our community anymore,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I had done a article for Psychology Today on Queen Victoria and death. Now, they knew how to do it back then, the
Mm.
Victorian age. It was all about death and dying and all the things that went with that. And we've certainly come a long way from that.
We have, and I think a lot of the Eastern traditions have got it a lot closer to what we'd call the right way,
Hmm.
in the fact that they honour people that have died
Yes.
in a certain way and do all these rituals, whether that has any
Hmm.
meaning or just showing respect.
Yes.
But it's accepted
Hmm.
that dying is a natural part of life. There's no stopping it. You can
Yeah.
delay it, but at the end of the day, is that really the best thing if it means quality of life goes down?
Yeah.
But
Do you have death cafes in England?
I've never
I,
heard of
oh,
one.
you never heard? Well, I thought that the woman who developed that began over in England and brought it to America. And what it
Perhaps.
is people getting together um, to talk about death, talk about their questions about. It's like a large group, and they serve cake and tea. That's why
Hmm.
it came
That
from England.
that sounds English, yeah.
Yes, it does.
Mm.
Uh, and I've been to several of them and led several of them, and it's very interesting because people don't have a forum to ask questions. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions about death as well as
Mm.
grief, and so
Mm.
the Death Cafe um, is a way of allowing people to talk about it in an environment where other people aren't going to
Mm.
put them down in some
And I
way.
think it's as probably both of us being psychologists in mind can see that that is a very strong benefit generally,
Hmm.
as a way of catharsis or anti-suppression and things like that. Being able to talk about these things is one of the core tenets of CBT, especially,
Hmm.
and having a medium such as that to talk about this sort of thing will do a lot of good, and would
Absolutely.
probably save a lot of mental anguish, especially in the older who are facing that kind of time.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm. So in our culture in the West, generally Christianity is the ruling religion. Do you find many near-death experiences, or not deathbed visions, or other such visions which involve kind of the standard idea of heaven and hell?
Yes. Yes. It doesn't necessarily have to be with um, someone is usually going to a better place, wherever they call it, whether it's heaven or hell. Although there's some experiences, near death experiences, that people have had very negative, distressing experiences with that. But for example, there was a study done, Haraldson and Ossis, Ossis, um, in India, and the population that they looked at experienced compared to those in America had more distressing experiences, and that um, they attribute it to what they call yamdoots. I'm sure I'm
Yeah,
mispronouncing that,
yeah, I've heard of
and
I've
that
heard of them.
the kind of the angel of death, although it's not an
Mm,
angel
mm,
that comes to get them. So there's a lot of fear around that.
yeah.
Um, and so it occurs in other religions as well.
Hmm. How common does it seem that the religious individuals who are dying see scenes or individuals from their specific religion? So Christians seeing Jesus, Hindus seeing get myself in trouble if I don't know the religions, but seeing their deities and Islam seeing their deities, does it seem culturally dictated?
Yes, yeah, it seems to be, and a lot of people in Louisiana, the majority of the population is Catholic, so it's not unusual for people to see Jesus or Mary or some Christian or Catholic figure. Um, Jews and Muslims sometimes will see angels. Doesn't have to be a specific thing, but you would think if the idea is to comfort somebody, you're not going to send, Attila the Hun or
No,
Hitler after
no,
you to
no.
come get you to take you to the other side. And I think that it is about comfort and easing the fear of dying, that you're going to be with somebody who you
Yeah,
love.
to me, that raises three possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
One, of course, we have to consider that it's culturally defined hallucination. I don't believe it, but we've got to
Okay.
consider it. Two is that, as you say, someone is sent in that form as a way of comforting their passing over. Or three, that somehow the minds of the individuals are putting that image onto some other kind of non-partisan entity, maybe just a spiritual entity, but their minds are putting on what they expect to see. So Jesus or whoever would be comforting for them. That's the three possibilities I can see.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes there's an account in my book about a woman who was Jewish and saw Jesus coming to get her. You know, so I don't know anything about that woman. But I think, yeah, a lot of it is culturally related. Um, for example, what we were talking about before, the Yamduts, that they saw, they were frightened because of the figure of death that was coming to get them. Whereas here, there weren't any, at least in my research, there wasn't any representation of the Grim Reaper or things like that. So, obviously culture is involved in it.
So yes, it's just to what extent and how that's
Mm-hmm.
manifests,
Yeah.
as we say, whether that is portrayed by the person themselves or whether something is putting that on for the benefit of them.
Yeah.
Um, so what are atheist experiences who expect nothing? Usually, I mean, atheism doesn't necessarily mean no afterlife belief, but generally speaking,
Yes.
those that expect annihilation, do
Mm-hmm.
we see visions and similar things with atheists?
Yes. Yes, they can.
What's the
They
general?
may only see family members as opposed to religious figures. I mean, not everybody sees religious figures. And sometimes your pet will come back and get you. So it's a whole range of people and things that will come back to help you cross over. And that's the point of the vision. And they say that I've helped I'm here to help take you home, to help you leave. Yeah. Children will also see things. They will see, I know there was one account of a young child seeing an angel, but the angel didn't have wings. And so, if it was somehow culturally related, if they'd seen pictures of angels, they might have seen it with wings, but they didn't. And there was another account of a child, must have been a near death experience, I'm trying to remember, um, who saw something in his experience. He recovered, went home. They were going through a picture album, and he said, "Oh, look, there's the man that was with me when I was gone." Or it was his great grandfather.
Who I
The kid
assume was
didn't.
died before he was born.
Yeah, yeah. I had no idea who that was, but he
So
was
I
there and helped.
identified him purely from what he saw in his vision.
Yes.
See,
Yeah.
that's an example of veridical
Yeah. Uh
perception,
huh.
which seems very
Yeah.
difficult to explain away.
Yes.
All you can really say is that it was a story made up by the parents for monetary gain or fame or whatever, but that's very much stretching it.
Yes, there are cynics around.
I remember talking to Chris, I think it's Batts or Betts, but Chris Batts, who was a near-death experiencer as a result of suicide,
Mm,
and he saw angels, all male, I believe. They had the wings, but
hmm.
one entity that he saw, which he believed to be an angel, was in the form of a beetle with wings, and I thought that's unusual. You don't really hear much about that, and on looking up the picture of the beetle that he kind of explained, I was able to find that there was some kind of a beetle entity or a god or a messenger of some kind in an ancient, I think it was Egyptian
Hmm.
mythology
Oh, yeah,
that
the
comes to,
scarab.
yeah, that
Hmm.
comes to collect you at death or
Yeah.
something similar. I can't remember, but it's interesting to see that sort of thing as well,
Yes.
because a beetle is not something you'd associate with angels and dying.
That's true. You certainly
Mm,
don't.
mm,
Yeah, but that is interesting.
it is.
The whole thing, the subject is fascinating because we don't know what answers, and it provides a mystery for life.
And the modern studies of quantum physics and things like that are beginning to give us a deeper insight into how everything seems to be a structure of energy and
Hmm.
intention, even almost. If the Copenhagen um, interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct, which means that consciousness basically brings everything into form, so to speak, in a very very simple way. So it seems to be that there is definitely some kind of ontological importance of our consciousness at the base of everything,
Hmm.
which again would then tie into the our expectations on these visions as to what we see for our own benefit.
Hmm.
What's your opinion on the idea of God as a separate entity?
Well, I believe in God.
Mm,
Um, so, I don't know whether he, she is a separate entity or just part of everything.
mm,
But I very strongly do believe
mm.
in a God.
Do you follow a religion?
Yes, I'm Jewish.
Jewish.
Mhm.
I'm not familiar with the Jewish traditions. I'm not religious in any way.
Okay.
I was forced into a Christian school as a kid, and it really put me off.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, so what is the Jewish generalized idea of God and heaven and hell? And do you follow it kind of in an orthodox fashion?
No, definitely not Orthodox. My grandparents were Orthodox. I was raised conservative, and I'm now very reform. I consider myself more spiritual, as people will say. Incorporate a number of different views. And so what I believe may be different than somebody who is an Orthodox or conservative Jew. Um, Jews believe, supposedly don't believe in an afterlife, which I do. You do good deeds on earth, and that's why you're here. It's nothing about going on to another life or anything like that. Although what's interesting is in the Kabbalah, there is um, reference to reincarnation. So, what was going on back in the day, so to speak, didn't carry over into today. I don't know what else was back there that people believed in that may be very consistent with some of the things we believe in today.
So, which line of evidence in your research do you find the most convincing of an afterlife or some form of continued consciousness?
Well, I think that mm, almost all of it. Um,
It's a
I was trying
collective
to
thing.
I was trying to narrow that down. It's like, well, no, then there's this and there's that. But I think that the deathbed visions and after death communications are really significant. I mean, like I said, certainly near death experiences and paradoxical lucidity also. But um, for example, uh, my mom died, it's been 20 years ago. And after she died, um, I started to find these little bitty white feathers everywhere. They were in my office, and they were outside in the hall and by the trees. And it was like, I don't know where that came from. I mean, it wasn't. And then at one point, it occurred to me that that was probably my mother trying to get in touch with me, to let me know that she's still there. Of course, I was talking to her and all these other things. Uh, and so that went on for quite a while, and it was very helpful to me. It was very comforting to know that she was there watching over me. And so then it kind of stopped for a bit. My book had come out, and so I had to go and do some public relations stuff, and I went to Mississippi where I had to do a radio show. That was my first one, a long time ago. So we went to a restaurant to eat, and I must say that I was quite anxious, having never done that before.
Of course.
So when we got ready to leave, the bathroom was outside. You had to go outside the restaurant to go to the restroom. So I turned the corner to go to the restroom, and there was this sidewalk with not a thing on it but one little white feather. Man, I ran to that feather and I grabbed that thing up. And I wasn't nervous anymore. I mean, you could say that's a coincidence, but that meant the world to me. I don't know where it came from because there weren't even any trees around there. So it's things like that. I guess the other thing I can share with you that was very convincing was before my mother died, this is quite a while before, she would take me in her closet and said, okay, this is the dress that I want to be buried in. Of course, okay, I didn't want to hear it then. I didn't want to think about her dying. So, but when the time came, I couldn't remember which one it was. So there was a blue one and there was this kind of peach colored one. So I liked the peach colored one, and so we buried her in that. I knew a woman who was psychic. So I said, well, let me just give her a call, see if she can check in with my mother and see how she's doing. And so she did her thing, and she said, your mother's really laughing. And I said, well, why is she laughing? And because the psychic was laughing also. She said, your mother wants to know what happened to the blue dress. And nobody else knew about that except the two of us.
No.
So, I mean, what? That was just more confirmation that her consciousness continues to live. And I think that many people have these experiences, although they're not aware of what they are and they don't want to tell anybody because it sounds like they're crazy. But so, I mean, there's evidence all around.
My mum recently, funny enough, on the last holiday or vacation we went on a few days ago, was talking about it. And it seems unusual because she's 51 or 52 and certainly nowhere near that level yet. But because our dog's on his way, he's 13 and he's got kidney failure and he's struggling.
Oh, poor baby.
And yeah, he was my first. It's going to break our hearts when he goes.
Yeah. And
because of that, it was on Mum's mind, and she was telling me that she wants to be cremated and have her ashes mixed with Ty's, our little dogs, and the second little dog when he goes, and spread across Dorset Beach. And it's nice in a way for her to be able to talk about that kind of thing.
But what did it do to you?
It doesn't bother me. It really doesn't.
Okay.
Because I suppose having done this research for near on 12 years, you kind of get accustomed to talking about it. And when Mum goes, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I'm an only child, and she was always my mum and my best friend.
Yeah.
Very immature when she wanted to be at the right times, very playful and very loving, would do anything for me. And equally, I'd do anything for her. So when she goes, I don't know what's going to happen.
It'll be hard.
But it will be very hard. But as I say, doing this kind of thing, you become accustomed to talking about it. And I think it gives us a great advantage because we understand that maybe we will meet again eventually. And it's nice to hear that people see their pets, because in heaven without Ty and Omi, I wouldn't really want to be there.
Yeah. It wouldn't be heaven if it wasn't. It wouldn't,
no.
Oh, no. Yeah. I've had people not only talk about their dogs, but horses coming back. And so, there are animals up there too.
So, did you believe then that every animal has what one would call a soul, or some kind of continuing entity? Or do you think it's only those that we have emotional connections with, or that have the ability to?
I don't know.
Mm,
I'm not
it's a
sure about
difficult
that.
thing, because then you have to wonder, does every ant or every flea?
Yeah.
And then you get questions, does it go down to viruses and bacteria? And it gets difficult, but certainly, as you say, there is evidence that at least those that we love
Yes.
are there.
Yes.
Mm.
Well, I hope COVID doesn't go there in terms of a virus.
We'll be all right. We don't have any lungs or anything for it to affect up there.
That's right. We'll be okay.
A spiritual COVID. That wouldn't be very nice. But I'll tell you actually a tale I had recently. Say recently, in 2014, my nan died. She was 80 something. She died of colon cancer.
Mm.
And I used to work in a warehouse where we made foam inserts for printers and things like that. When you put a printer in a box and have foam around it cut. Mm-hmm. And I used to cut the inserts. And there was a butterfly. I think it was the day I went back to work after my nan's death. I think it was 2 or 3 days after she died. And there's often been butterflies in there, but this particular one came down and sat on the workbench where I was. And you can imagine we had a saw and a router, which is a big drill, and it was a noisy place, not somewhere a butterfly would want to be. But he came down, he flew, and he sat on my bench and didn't move. And a colleague of mine came out and I said, "Here," I call him Bob, "look at this butterfly." And he came out and he poked at it, and it flopped over. He said, "That's fucking dead, that is," he said. And sort of whooshed it away, and I thought, "Oh, that's a shame." Kept going with my foam for about 10 minutes, and went back and looked at the butterfly, and he got up and flew away. And I thought, that's interesting. That's never happened before, and just after Nan's death.
Mm-hmm.
And as well, you were saying at the funeral there was abundance of white feathers. Didn't think much of that because that was a place where a lot of pigeons were. So, unfortunately, I've never really had any white feather on an empty sidewalk kind of situation, but the butterfly was
that
very
butterfly is sounds to me butterflies are frequently seen in after death communication. Actually, my daughter was in California when my mom died, and about the time that she died, there was a butterfly that came and perched on her hand, and she knew that was who that was. So, some people will say that we're crazy, but I don't believe that.
We might be crazy, but these crazy things still happened.
That's right. That's right.
We can't explain them. So you've been to mediums before?
Oh, absolutely.
And psychics. What's your thoughts of them? Because most people will say cold readers and fraudsters.
Yeah. Well, some people. Some people are cold readers.
Indeed.
But who's going to say what happened to your blue dress? I mean,
that's right.
What happened to the blue dress? And it's somebody that I'd been to before that I'd known, so that I trusted her. And I usually will only go see somebody if somebody I know has seen them and recommended them. But there are plenty of shysters out there who are just trying to get money. But I do believe there's some people with a gift. And they can communicate with the other side.
I'm always extra skeptical when it comes to those that do it for television audiences and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, do you remember Sylvia Browne?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is she still alive?
No, she died. But she was very good, but notoriously got a few things wrong that were pretty disastrous to her career. And on looking later on, she would charge things like $850 for a half an hour telephone reading, and that to me was...
That's disgusting.
That's about it. That tells you everything you need to know. Yep. And it's similar, I'm sure, for a lot of these online television personalities. So I'd say you always got to be very careful. If someone's... the best people to find is someone that aren't going to charge you and just do it because they feel it's the right thing to do. Or, of course, you need to make money if it's their main...
Or charge you some minimal fee. But, $500, $800 is ridiculous.
Exactly.
Nobody's worth that.
No. So do you think these mediums are indeed getting in touch with discarnate entities? Or because
the ones who really are doing it, I do believe that.
Because the other argument is that maybe it's some kind of psi connection, telepathic, between the sitter and the reader.
Well, way, I mean, you do read from the person, but the information is coming from somewhere else, I believe.
Hmm. Do you know of any scientific studies, research that's been done on this? I know of the Julie Byshell Winbrid Institute research. Um,
Yes, I do. It's a matter of my thinking of who did it, because he did a number of.
Gary Schwartz?
Yes, thank you. That's who
Hmm.
that was. Did you read his book?
I haven't. No.
Okay, yeah, he did. I have it somewhere. After 34 years in practice, I have books all over. I don't even know where things are, but yeah, he did some really good research.
Is he working on the soul phone currently? Is that Gary Schwartz?
Yeah, Gary Schwartz. I don't know what his more recent stuff is that
No.
he's doing.
I think he's involved with a soul phone, which is a piece of equipment that apparently technology that can reach the other side
Yeah,
in through a telephone kind of system. Not sure how that would work, but
I'm not
be
either.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Mm,
a lot of interesting things out there to look at.
certainly, as long as people are open to it.
Yes.
Is there anything you wanted to show? Books, websites?
Oh, I write a blog for Psychology Today, and it's psychologytoday.com/blog /US/.com understanding dash grief. How about all that? Or you can just Google my name
Oh,
in
I could. Yeah.
Psychology Today, and that will take you to my articles. So I do the blog is on different aspects of grief.